Right. Hello and welcome everyone at the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. My name is Caitlin Morno. I'm joined here by Orlando Mayorga from Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. I'm coming to you from Catholic Mobilizing Network, and we are thrilled to be with you and be in conversation today. So as you join, I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, where you're from, and your school or ministry group. We can't wait to see who's joining us today. And throughout today's conversation, we invite you to share your thoughts, your questions, your reactions in the chat. And we are online with you and looking forward to responding as we are able throughout the course of this half hour together. All right. Okay, so once again, mentioned earlier, I'm Caitlin Morno from Catholic Mobilizing Network, joined by Orlando Mayorga from Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, reentry coordinator there. And we are looking forward to sharing more about our particular roles, organizations, and stories and reflections throughout the course of this presentation. So very briefly, if you are not familiar with Catholic Mobilizing Network, we are a national Catholic organization that works to end the death penalty and promote restorative justice. And so before we dive too much more into the conversation, I want to take a moment to invite you into the chat with us and would love to hear from you where you kind of fall in the spectrum of familiarity with the term restorative justice. So if this is maybe your first time hearing the term, or you've heard about it but feeling fuzzy on what it is, maybe put in a 1. If you feel like you're really experienced, maybe you've had the opportunity to engage with some practices, put a 5 in there. And if you're somewhere in between, 2s, 3s, and 4s are more than welcome. I'm going to give just a few moments for folks to tell us how familiar you feel with restorative justice. Okay, looking forward to your responses. Real quick, just want to say there's no one definition of restorative justice, but this is how Catholic Mobilizing Network tends to describe it. Now, restorative justice is a way of understanding crime and harm in terms of the people and relationships impacted, rather than the rule or law that was broken. Restorative practices seek to repair harm through transformative encounters that model Jesus's reconciling way. So furthermore, we know that this particular presentation is really focused on RJ's alignment with Catholic social teaching. And as a lived expression of Catholic social teaching principles, restorative justice offers a framework for transforming relationships and systems that values human dignity, accountability, healing, and racial equity. So now I'd really like to hand it over to Orlando to tell us a little bit more about yourself and Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. Over to you, Orlando.
Hello, everybody. My name is Orlando Mayorga. I serve as Director of Reentry and Program Manager at Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. We are a small organization on the south side of Chicago and based in the back of the Yards neighborhood, where we want to bring healing to the community first by making sure that human dignity is at the forefront of what it is that we do. I think throughout this presentation, throughout this dialogue, we're going to be highlighting what exactly human dignity is, not only to myself, but to the community that we serve and also to us as an organization. Just to give you a brief description of what our mission is at Precious Blood, it's rooted in the spirituality of the Precious Blood. We restore human dignity through hospitality, hope, and healing. So the hospitality part is more than just the traditional hospitality that you might think of. We tend to approach it through a radical hospitality, making sure that no matter what the person's background is, no matter how they're coming to our doors, we always make sure to value the humanity of whatever young person or older person comes and walks through our center doors. We always want to make sure to make people feel safe in the spaces that we provide. And that, again, is just at the root of what radical hospitality is. I often hear young people and people coming home from prison say that there's a different vibe, there's a different feeling to the space that Precious Blood is. On the outside, it might look like we're rough around the edges, but coming into our space, it's definitely a feeling of safety, a feeling of peace. And I speak to that not only because of what I hear, but also because of what I have experienced myself, being a recipient of that radical hospitality. And like I myself having experience with the criminal justice system and not being seen as the worst mistake I ever made, but really taking into account who I am as a human being. And again, through that process, through providing that initial tenet of what our restorative justice pillars are, it provides hope. It provides healing for the person to be able to be viewed through the lens of humanity as opposed to the punitive punishing ways of the criminal justice system. Just to add to that, we work as agents of reconciliation to build relationships among youth and families impacted by violence and or conflict. Again, we create safe spaces where people can experience that radical hospitality, that hope, and that healing. And we try to promote restorative justice, not by word, but more so by action, by living and embodying those principles and that philosophy of being able to be there in community with people. And as a result of that, providing the healing, that reciprocal healing that takes place when people are in community with one another. Again, just sharing a little bit more about my background. I came to Precious Blood 3 years ago after serving 20 years in prison. I was a young person who did not understand my way or my place in the world. And out of fear and anger, I tended to make some terrible decisions that sadly cost me 20 years of my life, and more tragically ended up leading to me causing another person harm and that life not being with us anymore. I always make sure to honor this person's life, Francisco Arellano, because it was out of that experience and out of really accepting accountability for the harm that I had caused that I now honor his life through the work that I do. And in retrospect, I wish it would not have taken that. But these are the conversations that are not had when you have a criminal justice system the way that it's set up. And from my experience, again, and throughout this conversation, we're going to have those conversations about who it is that speaks for who when it comes to the systems that we rely on in society. For myself, it was a lawyer who spoke for me. For the side of the family that had been harmed, it was the state. And ultimately, the decision maker for the community was the judge. And in no way or in no space was there created for anyone who has a stake in community, in community building, having word to address not only the harm that was done, but what would be needed in order to heal community in a way that brought reconciliation. So out of that experience, out of my experience learning to build community from others in places that society generally doesn't think communities can exist, and I mean prison by that, I learned to recognize my own humanity in connection to those around me, to other incarcerated people, and understanding that agency was not something that could be learned, but something that is within us and has to be engaged in some way. And I learned that through other people mentoring me, through other people planting seeds of hope in me. And that's what I try to do every single day. I don't come at this work, and I don't think anyone at the center at Precious Blood come at it from a helping way. We understand that there's a quote that I like to say. It says, if you have come to help me, then you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I believe that. I believe that recognizing that our liberation rests on each of us in community and collaboration with each other is the way that communities can be built up, and then begin relying less on the systems of oppression that exist that tend to break communities apart. I don't want to get too long-winded, but this is who I am. This is who I hope to continue to be, in addition to who I'll continue to become.
So today we want to explore some of these themes together and hopefully inspire ways that we might bring them back to our communities. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that when many of us first hear about restorative justice, myself included, we may imagine a dialogue between parties who have been directly impacted by the same crime. And sometimes called victim offender dialogue or community conferencing. These can be profoundly transformative, as Orlando knows from his ministry. And we also recognize that they're not always possible or may not be appropriate depending on the particular circumstances. But there are many ways to live these principles of restorative justice that kind of inform those practices beyond a particular type of encounter. Just want to acknowledge that another a process that we talk about a lot is circle process or peacemaking circles, which our friends at PPMR I know use a lot, which can be really versatile in both responding to harm directly, but also community building and mutual support, reflection, prayer, etc. So one of the things we hope to unpack together in our conversation is ways that we can understand these principles and learnings from these particular practices in ways that transform systems, communities, as well as relationships, whether interpersonal or otherwise. And so a few of these principles that we know kind of undergird these practices, whether direct dialogue or circle or others, are dignity, human dignity, as Orlando mentioned, healing, relationship, and transformation. So I'm going to share a little bit about more of each of these concepts and how we think of them in relationship to our Catholic faith and restorative justice, and then invite Orlando to kind of respond from your experience. So when we think about upholding dignity, that true justice upholds the value of all life, and that's no matter the harm that a person has suffered or caused or experienced. Harm and injustice violate dignity in relationships. Restorative justice prioritizes the needs of those harmed, those who cause harm, and the community and their communities and families, and creates opportunities for all these voices to be honored. So Orlando, in your experience, and you shared a little bit about this earlier, if there's anything else you'd like to add, what does it look like to uphold human dignity?
Yeah, it seems like a simple question, right? And yet, like, understanding human dignity is something that I'm still trying to answer. And I think it begins, we used to have this model called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, right? And really upholding human dignity is for me being able to provide the opportunities, the choices, and everything that it takes to provide those things to reach that peak of self-actualization, to be able to answer those existential questions about who am I, or like, why am I here, right? And I think at the core of who we are as human beings, we all want to be in right relationships with one another. And things tend to happen in life that doesn't make that always act in harmony, right? So harm is caused, and you would hope that could be a not a system, but a process in place to be able to put people together to understand why that harm happened in the first place. Understanding victim and victimization is something that has been a long life journey for me. I was very individualistic when it came to my pain and my feelings in the beginning as a young person. But learning how to get beyond that is part of that human dignity for me, right? Empowering people and not allowing me, but creating spaces where I feel empowered enough to understand what my role has been or was in causing harm to others. Being able to keep myself accountable and understanding that it's not the absence of accountability, right? But it's understanding that there needs to be repair within that broken relationship, whether it's with family, whether it's with the community, or whether it's with a person that has been harmed by actions done in community. So upholding community means to me, again, being able to speak for myself, allowing people, creating spaces for people to share not only their greatest hurts, but also how it is that they can get back to enjoying their greatest joys. Not relying so much on systems to speak for us, but providing those, again, those choices, those opportunities for communities to be mended in that way, that people start recognizing that there is a collective component to building up community. So that to me is, again, what I believe human dignity is, what communities need in order to continue, like, to thrive and to really begin building up everything that has been destroyed, either by interpersonal, intrapersonal, and or state sanctioned violence and harm.
I love how you talked about right relationship. And this is a term that, after I learned about it in the context of restorative justice, I learned that our Catholic social teaching uses that very same term when it says that justice is being in right relationship with God, one another, and creation. I think that's so profound. And so in building relationship, we acknowledge our place in this interconnected web of relationships, which means fostering mutual responsibility and accountability for and with one another. And I think you already spoke to so much of that. And so I'm curious, is there anything else that you'd like to add about what it means to you to live in right relationship with your family, your community, maybe those whose lives you have impacted or who have impacted your own life?
I think also just being comfortable and accepting in our perfect imperfections. I think I've heard people say that, like, we're not perfect creatures. Like, I think the word tells us that, right? But it doesn't mean we can't be in right relationship with one another. And I think, you know, the gospel tells us that, like, to love our neighbor, to be able to do whatever it is that we can in order to see our, and I keep going back to thriving communities, because I don't believe that our communities should be in the disarray that they seem to be. But I think it's because, again, of all these broken relationships that are in existence in our communities, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Louisiana, whether it's, you know, wherever.
And so a restorative vision of justice seeks to address the suffering of those who've experienced harm and victimization, whether that's physical, emotional, material, social, spiritual, you name it, in a holistic sense, and, you know, to the greatest extent possible. And so justice encourages those who cause harm toward authentic accountability and making amends, and that communities are a part of this too, right? So communities may experience harm and can also, participate in the perpetuation of harm and injustice and oppression. And so I guess I'm curious, Orlando, especially right now where we're so aware, particularly of racial oppression and how that manifests in our criminal legal system. What does the journey toward healing look like for some of the folks that you minister with?
Oh, it begins again with something as simple as storytelling, right? Which is at the core of what restorative justice, I think, is. I think, like even our Lord Jesus was a storyteller, right? He used to speak in parables to help the masses understand the nature of the society they lived in, right? But again, the relationship component, and I hear this a lot in the spaces that I'm in, when it comes to sitting in circle, to sitting in community with people. And the more you get to know people, again, this is what is said, and what I believe is the more you sit in community with people, the more you share your stories, the less likely you are to cause harm to those in those spaces. Being able to find that healing within those spaces is part of that. Understanding that though I may not know exactly what it is to walk in your shoes, Caitlin, or vice versa, there are some shared pains and some shared truths to who we are as human beings. And being able to see that, being able to get past the superficial of what we see on the outside, and understanding that we carry a lot of hurt in us. We carry a lot of burdens on our shoulders. But also being able to share some of those greatest victories as a result of the storytelling, to be able to teach one another, to be able to understand that not only are we healing, but we're teaching each other how to be human beings, right? That is what healing looks like to me. So really, like, looking at it through an asset-based lens, heal people, right? And I believe that, just the same way that people tend to believe that hurt people. On the positive side, those that learn to heal do help heal others, and that's the way that I see healing happening, not only at Precious Blooded, but in every space that I encounter restorative justice in.
So I want to have this conversation about transformation, and just start off by acknowledging that restorative justice pursues and promotes personal, communal, and systemic healing and change. And for our communities to know safety and wholeness, that we have to be willing to name and address social inequity, including systemic racism, including trauma, including poverty. And so I would love for you to describe a little bit, Orlando, about how this translates into your promotion and advocacy for systemic change and healing and transformation, particularly in Chicago.
I think one of the more difficult things to have a conversation about when it comes to interpersonal relationships is that the onus begins with the person, the self, and being able to acknowledge harm, being able to come to the realities of the harm that a person has done is not the difficult part. It's when it comes to the systems in place that cause harm that are not yet ready to accept that same accountability. That's what makes it difficult. Because it's one thing for me as a person, as Orlando, to find healing within myself and still have to deal with getting pulled over or getting asked questions in the neighborhoods that I'm walking around, and just for no reason. And the no reason is usually racism, right? The racism does exist. Poverty still exists. All the evils that Dr. King highlighted when he spoke, militarism still exists. So it's not easy to have those difficult dialogues when it comes to systems that are not yet ready to take accountability for the harm that has been historically done over and over for hundreds of years. I think there needs to be a form of what took place in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Court, right? To provide those spaces where people can feel as if they can be their authentic selves when it comes to acknowledging that harm. Are systems ready to do that? I don't think so. We still have issues of mass incarceration. We still have hyper criminalization of Black and brown people. We still have policing that is done at a much different level in communities of where Black and brown people reside. So yeah, but I'm also encouraged by some of the changes that are taking place. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a training, community-based Chicago Police Department training where CPD officers were actually trained by people like myself, people with backgrounds like myself, to help officers understand where this harm and where distrust happened and why it's that way. So there are steps being taken. I'm not discouraged. I'm definitely hopeful. I'm always my friend usually calls me the unrealistic optimist, right? But I dare to be that, right? I want to be a person who sees the world and imagines a world that can be as opposed to what it is right now. So being part of that change is something that's very empowering as well. To be able to advocate for laws and policies that have done more harm to people like myself than good is something that I'm very, very privileged to feel. My Platos are still at Danville Correctional Center, brothers who taught me what existentialism meant, right? To have those discussions about who we are, who we want to be, and who we intend to be. Like that's where I come from, and I'm not the exception to the rule. That's what I want to definitely make sure people get out of what I'm saying. There is value in community wherever community exists, and we found community, brotherhood, and family within the prison system. Not saying that it takes a prison system to make that happen. My hope and my imagination is a world without prisons. I may not live to see it, but I do believe we're moving in that way, and I hope that we are moving in that way.
You and me both. Thank you so much, Orlando. So I just want to share with you a few things you can find on Catholic Mobilizing Network's website that we do host throughout the year. Circle trainings, as well as what we call intensives, which are kind of opportunities to experience circle practice. And we do those in person, and now we're doing them online, so you can find more information on our website, as well as recommended books and films, including a faith formation guide on restorative justice and the Catholic faith called Harm, Healing, and Human Dignity. More online resources. We have a blog sharing stories from folks like Orlando, as well as, of course, our death penalty actions. And I encourage you to sign the National Catholic Pledge to End the Death Penalty if you haven't done that already. It's a great way to stay connected with all of CMN's resources and opportunities. So Orlando, what would you like to share on behalf of PBMR?
Our models have actually been created as a result of input from the needs of the community. So some of those needs, again, are the wood shop, the pottery, and screen printing, where we're able to offer pre-entry employment to people in the community, like to be able to learn those soft skills through making talking pieces, to be able to engage in the arts and crafts, pottery, and some people have actually designed their own T-shirts, their own designs when it comes to the silk screening. Our Making Choices newsletter has been very impactful in the juvenile detention centers and in the adult prisons, where people can write poems, share artwork, and be able to see that artwork being offered by currently incarcerated people is something that provides, again, some of that hope, that you can engage your humanity through the different intrinsic gifts that you have. Our mother circles are, again, one of my favorite models at the program because it brings together mothers who have lost children to violence in the community, but also mothers who have lost children or loved ones to the system of mass incarceration, to prison. And again, being able to bring together people to provide spaces that are usually opposed to one another in the criminal justice system is the reason why I value that space. And my mother has actually been part of one of those circles before. She doesn't like to drive too far, so she hasn't made it back, but she definitely enjoyed that experience because it's a welcoming, loving space, much like the peace circles that we have with our young people at the center as well. I would hope that you look at our website, www.pbmr.org, to learn more about not only who we are, but more importantly, who our community is, because that at the end of the day is the reason why Precious Blood exists.
So thank you so much, Orlando, for sharing these opportunities with us. We hope that those with us on the line are taking away something new, something inviting, something challenging from this conversation as a part of your experience at the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. Thank you for being with us. Thank you so much, Orlando. Our contact information is here if you'd like to be in touch, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all so much.